Hi, welcome to my video on the Gould study done in 1982 on a nation of morons. The background to Gould study is Alfred Binet and IQ testing. Alfred Binet developed the first IQ tests, and he wanted to use them to try and identify children who needed a little bit more help in their education. So he could IQ test a class of children, and he could identify child A, B and C as needing some extra assistance. He believed that IQ was nurture rather than nature, and that IQ could actually be improved by the teachers that you have and the school that you go to, and therefore we could actually help people who have a low IQ. However, other people who like to use IQ testing became scientists who believed that individual differences between IQ is due to genetic differences, and that if society chose, it could breed out particular characteristics such as low IQ and actually breed a superior race of people who actually have a higher IQ. This is called eugenics, and it's the idea that you don't let people breed or have children who have a low IQ or a particular characteristic that you don't want to carry on in the population. It's very unethical, and it's an idea that some people have that is quite frankly appalling. It was used by Hitler and the Nazis in the Second World War, talking about certain characteristics that they wanted to breed out of the German population, such as Jewishness, such as they wanted to breed the Aryan race, so the blue eyes and the blonde hair, and the scientists also did lots of tests on like twins and disabled people, people with mental disorders, to try and understand where it came from, what caused it, and then they could try and prevent it from happening. It's really unethical thought and train of thinking. Hereditarians are scientists who are in favour of eugenics, and they believe that we should identify those of a lower intelligence and not let them breed. And they believe that a consequence of this is that the genetic stock of the population will be improved, which in theory is correct, but it's totally unethical and, like I said, absolutely appalling. So, intelligence. Trying to define intelligence has proved really problematic for psychologists because it's not something that you can see, it's not something that you can touch, and it can be quite difficult to measure. So instead of trying to test intelligence, instead of trying to focus on defining intelligence, instead we've tried to focus on testing intelligence, whatever intelligence may be, because there are different types of intelligence. One key issue relating to intelligence, which we've already touched upon, is the idea of nature and nurture. Is the intelligence, does that come from nature or does it come from nurture? Are you naturally clever, or is it because of the school that you've been to, the teachers that you've had, the work that you've done, your parents pushing you, etc.? We look at a study later on in child psychology by a guy called Van Leeuwen, which I've told you about already. And they do tests on IQ and parents and their children and siblings, and they find that actually intelligence is genetic, but the environment does have an impact on your intelligence as well. So, Gould, 1982. Yerkes did the original study. So, this can be a little bit confusing because I'll switch between two different psychologists, which are Yerkes and Gould. Yerkes did the original study in the First World War, so 1914 to 1918, and he was looking at army recruits and intelligence testing. Then Gould in 1982 did a review of Yerkes' study, and he talked about why Yerkes' study was problematic. And Gould identifies in his book the following issues in psychology. He looks at the problematic nature of psychometric testing in general and the measurement of intelligence in particular. So using psychometric tests, using IQ tests, is that something that can be a problem? He also looks at the problem of theoretical bias influencing research in psychology. So how actually psychologists are biased and their research can reflect their own views and opinions. In particular, how psychological theories on the inherited nature of intelligence and the prejudice of a society can dramatically distort the objectivity of IQ testing. Yerkes basically said that a whole group of people weren't intelligent, and the way that he did it was totally flawed, but I'll get into that in a bit more detail later on. Gould also comes along and says the problem of the political and ethical implications of the research, in this case the use of biased data to discriminate between people in suitability for occupation and even admission to a country. Based on Yerkes' results, the government actually wouldn't let people of a certain race or who had certain characteristics get refuge in America, basically, because they were running from the Nazis in the Second World War, and they were trying to flee the country, and they were trying to escape to America. And based on Yerkes' results, the government had actually brought in a policy at the time to prevent certain people from entering the country based on them having a lower intelligence, as according to Yerkes. So, Robert Yerkes was a psychologist, and in 1915, mental testing did not enjoy much credibility. He wanted to improve the reputation of psychology. He wanted to make it more scientific, make it a more hard science, and he believed that IQ testing was the way to do this. He believed that IQ testing should be as rigorous as any other science, as he equated science with hard number and quantification. He also believed that IQ was nature, so that it's fixed and can't be affected by your environmental factors. During the First World War, he had an opportunity to promote the use of IQ tests and therefore improve the status of psychology in society. The military gave Colonel Yerkes, as he liked to call himself, permission to carry out mental tests to over 1.75 million army recruits. He did this in 3 different ways. He had 3 different tests. So he did account for the lack of some people's literacy skills. So the first test that he gave his participants was the Army Alpha test. And this was a written test for literate recruits. Literate means that you can read and write. The Alpha test had 8 parts, such as analogies, filling in the missing number, and unscrambling a sentence. And these types of tests have become quite common in modern IQ tests. In the Army Beta test, this was a pictorial test for men who were illiterate, so who couldn't read or write, or who had failed the Alpha test. The Beta test had 7 parts, including running a maze, number work, and a picture completion task. And then the last type of test used was an individual spoken test for men who had failed the Beta test. So this is a sample of the Army Alpha test. We are going to have a look at this in a little bit more detail in class. We're going to have a go at answering the questions and talking about what might be wrong with it. But if you want to pause the video, have a quick look and think about possible reasons that this might be not an appropriate test to do. This is the Alpha B picture completion task, and basically you've got to say what's missing in the picture. We're also going to have a look at this in class and have a go at doing it. So, Yerkes' results. Yerkes found, and I say this liberally, he found that white American men had a mean mental age of 13.04, which means they had the mental IQ or the mental capacity of a 13-year-old. He found that black Americans had a mean mental age of 10.41, so the mental age of a 10-year-old. Found that Russian immigrants had a mental age of 11.34, Italian immigrants 11.01, and Polish immigrants 10.74. So he's basically saying that white Americans are the smartest and black Americans are the least intelligent. However, there are lots and lots of problems with the way that he did his research, which I'm sure you can think of a few already. But we'll talk about it further in class. So, Yerkes argued that his tests measure native intellectual ability. In other words, your innate intelligence, which is not affected by culture or education. At the time, the results had a massive impact, and at the end of the war, some of the camps were using the test to screen people for officer training. So people got a rating, a grade, from A+ to E-, and they actually could get a promotion or move jobs based on these ratings. And men who scored below grade C were not thought to be suitable officer material. So not only are his results affecting government policy of letting refugees in, but they're also affecting people, their career opportunities. They couldn't actually advance in the army because of this one test that they did with Yerkes. So Yerkes found 3 facts, and I say facts with air quotations because they're not facts, they're his opinions. He found that the mental age of white American adults was 13. This, previously, it was thought that the score to be classed as a moron, i.e. an idiot, would be at least 16. And so if a 25 or a 30-year-old adult is getting the score of a 13-year-old, then that suggests that they perhaps aren't as clever as other people. So that's why the study is called A Nation of Morons, because Yerkes concluded from his study that all Americans were idiots, basically. He also decided that it was possible to grade European immigrants by their country of origin. And so the average man of many countries was actually a moron, with the fair people of Northern and Western Europe, so fair skin, scoring higher than people who lived in Eastern Europe and dark people of Southern Europe. So the average Russian had a mental age of 11.34, the Italian 11.01, and the Pole 10.74. So they actually equated intelligence with the colour of people's skin. And I'm sure you can imagine the face that I'm pulling right now. It's ridiculous. Which is why we don't just focus on Yerkes, and we actually focus on Gould's criticism of Yerkes. Because if you can imagine what people might think if we said, actually, this is what Yerkes found, this is what, this is the actual case, and it's not. We know that it's not true. He also said that the average score of black men was 10.4, which was considerably below the white average. So he's making serious comparisons between races and intelligence, which are completely and utterly wrong. So Yerkes concluded that the average white American was a moron, and this caused some concern. This is because these findings were used to support the idea of genetic differences between races. One of Yerkes' colleagues used a genetic explanation which explained the racial superiority of the Nordic people from Northern Europe. Similarly, it was argued that the average scores from the different national groups reflected innate racial differences. And based on these facts and lobbying from scientists who supported the eugenics argument, the Immigration Restriction Act in 1924 was passed by US Congress, and the Act set immigration quotas based on the US population in 1890 for the next 30 years. And this year was used as the benchmark because immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe had been relatively low before this date. So they used this data to prevent people from coming into the country around the Second World War when people needed refuge. So Gould obviously criticises Yerkes, and for good reason, because there are lots and lots of problems with Yerkes' study. The main one being the cultural bias in the tests. There is a level of cultural and educational knowledge required to do well in the tests. For example, one of the questions from the alpha test is, Crisco is A, patent medicine, disinfectant, toothpaste, or food product. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't know what Crisco is either. Washington is to Adams as first is to... No idea. And Christy Mathewson is famous as a writer, artist, baseball player, or comedian. Nope, still no idea. Therefore, I must also be a moron. Similarly, the beta test also required a level of cultural and educational knowledge to be completed successfully. For example, recent immigrants would have to be familiar with phonograms, tennis courts, and light bulbs to know what was missing. So the reason that they did poorly on the test was not because they did not have a good IQ. It was because it was based on American culture, and a lot of them had not grown up in American culture. So that's a summary of Gould's study. You've got the aim, which was to reveal basic problems in attempts to measure intelligence in Yerkes' study. You've got the method, which is a review article of Yerkes' method. Participants were 1.75 million army recruits. The results are that white Americans are smarter than black Americans, Russians, Italians, but only just, and they still classed as a nation of morons. And the conclusion is that Yerkes' findings are flawed despite having massive consequences for American society at the time. Thank you for watching my video. I hope that's cleared up any questions you've got about Gould's study. Please let me know if there's anything you're not sure about, and let me know in class. Okay, see you later. Bye.